I'm Detective James, and this is the cases the news forgot.
I've been a detective for over 30 years, and I've seen things most people would call impossible. I've walked into crime scenes that made me question logic, traced disappearances that made me question reality, and heard stories people swore were true. But nothing prepared me for the call that brought me to the northern forests that summer. The report was simple. 2 hikers missing, no traces, no struggle, just gone. What caught my attention, though, was the way the local rangers spoke of it. They didn't just say the hikers vanished. They said the forest didn't want them to leave. That sounded like nonsense at first. I'd spent decades chasing facts, not folklore. But there's a kind of instinct that you develop after seeing too much. And mine screamed that this wasn't ordinary. I arrived just after dawn. The fog hung thick, heavy over the pines, spilling like smoke from one tree to the next. The forest was dense, old growth with roots that twisted into the ground like veins, and the trunks so thick they blocked the rising sun from reaching the dirt beneath. At first glance, it looked peaceful, idyllic, a postcard forest. But as soon as I stepped onto the trail, something subtle shifted. Every sound was muted. My boots crunched softly against the dirt, but the noise was absorbed by the trees as though they were swallowing it. Birds chirped far off in the distance, but their calls echoed oddly, like they were bouncing between walls made of living wood. Ranger Ellis met me at the trailhead. He was mid-30s, lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that had grown too tired for his age. He didn't shake my hand. He just gestured toward the trail and said quietly, "They went in right there. Easy hike. Should have been fine in 2 hours." His voice had that tightness I'd heard in people who've seen the wrong thing in the woods, the kind of tension that didn't leave when you slept. According to GPS data from one of the hikers' phones, they'd entered the trail around 10 a.m. and walked steadily for 45 minutes before turning back. And then the signal stopped. No movement at all, as though the phones had died mid-step. Drones had been deployed to search overhead, but their cameras captured something strange. The tree line appeared denser the further they went in. Not gradually, not in a way that made sense. Branches overlapped in patterns that shouldn't exist naturally, and patches of shadow didn't match the sunlight. Some of the recorded images seemed almost layered. A single shot might show a hiker, but closer inspection revealed a second shadowy figure, standing behind a tree that wasn't in that frame moments before. I stepped onto the trail alone, carrying only a backpack with essentials, my recorder, and a flashlight. The air smelled earthy, damp, and faintly metallic. With each step, the ground seemed to absorb sound. Even as I called out the hikers' names, my voice came back to me softer than it should have been, as if filtered through layers of moss and bark. The trees stood so still it was unnatural. Even the light peeking through the canopy didn't reach the forest floor evenly. Patches of brightness and shadow seemed deliberate, almost choreographed. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the first oddity that made my pulse quicken. 2 trees, standing a few feet apart, seemed closer together than they should have been. I swore I'd stepped past them before, but my memory insisted I hadn't. Shrugging it off, I continued, telling myself it was fatigue or paranoia. Then I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker, a sway. I turned slowly, but there was nothing. Only branches quivering slightly, no wind, no bird. Still, it felt deliberate, like the forest had eyes I couldn't see. By the time I reached the clearing, about 40 minutes in, my stomach had begun to knot. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if the forest had shifted to show it to me. The light was different here, dimmer, filtered through an unseen layer of leaves, almost like a permanent dusk. At the center stood a single massive tree, gnarled and older than anything surrounding it. Its bark was darker, almost black, and its roots stretched outward, curling into the dirt like fingers grasping for something. Around it were hundreds of footprints, bare, overlapping, pressed into the soil in concentric loops. None of them led away from the clearing. I knelt to touch the dirt, and it was warm, too warm for early morning in that climate. The forest shifted slightly around me, branches bending inward. The air grew thick, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me, not ahead, to my left. They moved in perfect time with my own pace. I froze. The sound stopped when I stopped. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only shadows and trunks, perfectly still. Then a figure emerged, human-shaped, but wrong. One of the missing hikers, or someone wearing his shape. Pale, eyes unfocused, dirt clinging to his bare feet. His jaw moved slowly, chewing something invisible. "You shouldn't stop walking," he said. His voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from everywhere, echoing inside my skull. And I understood, in that single terrifying moment, that the forest wasn't hunting. It wasn't random, it was collecting. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. My body wanted to move toward the grooves in the dirt, toward the circle of footprints that seemed to pulse with life. But I forced myself to resist. Every instinct told me that the clearing, the tree, and the forest around it were all part of the same thing. An organism with patience, waiting for me to make a mistake. The figure tilted its head, slow, deliberate, and the forest responded. Branches creaked and shifted just enough to feel like they were leaning inward, narrowing the edges of the clearing. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the dirt in ways that didn't make sense with the sun's position. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest, slowing my breath. I realized that this forest measured fear, calculated it, and used it to shape its environment. I wanted to speak, but my words felt trapped in my throat. Finally, I managed, "Where are they?" My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the surrounding trees. The figure's mouth moved slightly, forming words that weren't spoken aloud. Yet I heard them, crystal clear, inside my mind. They stayed. They joined. They belong. A cold dread washed over me. The hikers hadn't wandered off by accident. They'd been absorbed, becoming part of the forest's endless record, their steps, their voices, their very presence embedded into the soil, the bark, the leaves. And now, I could feel it trying to do the same to me. I moved backward, slowly, trying to break the pull. My foot hit one of the worn paths around the central tree, and immediately I felt the invisible tug stronger, drawing me forward. The figure's gaze, or whatever it was, seemed to pierce through me. And then, in a horrifying moment, I noticed movement in the shadows along the clearing's perimeter. The branches and trunks weren't just leaning, they were swaying, twisting slightly, aligning as though responding to my presence. The whispers began then. Not soft, like wind but layered. Many voices speaking all at once. Names, partial words, sounds I recognized from missing person reports. My own name echoed back at me. Each whisper carried memory, repetition, and intent. This was more than a forest. It was a recording device, a library of souls and experiences, and it had been watching me from the moment I stepped onto the trail. Panic tried to rise, but I focused, forcing myself to step sideways, to keep moving around the edge of the clearing, testing its limits. The figure followed, gliding rather than walking. Its eyes locked on mine, unblinking, emotionless, and yet I felt every thought it had projected. I realized with a chilling clarity that the forest didn't just want observation. It demanded participation. Those who noticed it became part of the ritual, part of the concentric paths around the ancient tree. Branches snapped softly as I skirted the edge of the clearing, scraping my arms, snagging my clothes. Leaves and dirt clung to me, as if trying to pull me in. My breathing grew ragged. Every muscle screamed to flee, but the forest was patient. The shadows stretched and twisted, and I swear I saw shapes moving within them. Figures frozen mid-step, caught in time, waiting. I spoke again, louder this time, forcing my voice into the open air. I'm leaving now." The echoes didn't respond with fear. Instead, they shifted rhythm, almost like they were counting, observing my reaction. The figure's lips moved. "No, not yet. You must walk, or be still forever." I lunged forward, tearing past the branches, breaking through the undergrowth. The clearing seemed to expand briefly, then contract behind me. The forest adapted. Paths that had been clear moments ago were now blocked by roots, shrubs, and low-hanging branches. Every step I took, the environment shifted subtly, guiding me along a route I didn't choose, toward a destination I couldn't see. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I stumbled, tripping over a root and falling face first into dirt. The whispers intensified, urgent now, layered voices overlapping in impossible harmony. "You see, you see, you see." Pain shot through my shoulder from the fall, but I forced myself up and ran again. I knew if I paused, even for a second, the pull would claim me. Finally, the forest loosened slightly. The trail ahead opened, faint sunlight filtering through the canopy again. My chest heaved. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears. When I emerged near the trailhead, Ellis was waiting. His eyes were calm, but there was recognition there, a knowledge of what I'd endured. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. The hikers were gone. The clearing had vanished. The forest behind me looked untouched, normal, benign. And yet, I could still feel it, coiled and patient, waiting for the next person to step in, to be noticed, to be collected. Weeks later, I learned that hikers still report the forest. Paths rearrange themselves behind them. Shadows stretch in impossible ways. Whispered names call from the undergrowth. Some report hearing voices of people they know, or should know, but are missing. And some, those who pause too long, feel the forest guiding them, urging them to continue, or be absorbed. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see that clearing. I can see the tree, the circle of footprints, and the figure that didn't move but watched everything I did. I can still hear the whispers of the missing hikers in the back of my mind, reminding me that observation is never neutral. The forest watches, always. I couldn't stay away, not completely. Weeks passed, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing, the tree, the figure. The whispers, faint but persistent, gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Something about that forest had marked me. It wasn't just memory, it was awareness, pulling at me like a tether. I knew I had to go back, but this time I prepared. Cameras, motion sensors, GPS trackers, audio recorders, every tool I had. I told myself I would document, observe, and survive. The trailhead looked empty that morning, but the fog was thick, rolling low across the roots and rocks, swallowing the path like a living thing. From the first step inside the trees, the forest was waiting. I felt it before I saw it, the subtle pressure in my chest, the faint tug at my legs, like invisible hands guiding my movements. Every step had to be deliberate, every sound measured. The undergrowth seemed to rearrange itself subtly, shifting to direct my path deeper into the woods. I reached the clearing sooner than expected, almost unnervingly so. The ancient tree stood at the center as before, gnarled and dark, but now I noticed details I hadn't before. Scratches in the bark, intricate and deliberate, forming patterns almost like writing but not language I could read. Small depressions in the dirt formed faint lines radiating outward, connecting footprints, overlapping circles, the marks of those who had come before and those who had not returned. I realized I was stepping into a living record, a library the forest had been keeping for decades. Movement appeared on the far edge of the clearing. The figure emerged slowly, gliding rather than walking, shadowed yet unmistakably human. The hikers, or their echoes, stood in positions that mirrored the concentric paths in the dirt. Their faces pale, eyes vacant, but still observing. One of them turned toward me, head tilting unnaturally, jaw moving slightly. And then, voices, not from their mouths but inside my own mind, layered together, forming a chorus. You see, you see, you see, you must walk, you must walk, you must walk. The forest reacted as I did. Every movement I made, it responded. Roots shifted subtly to trip me. Leaves brushed against me with precise timing. The longer I stayed, the more insistent the whispers became. The circle of footprints seemed to extend endlessly, suggesting that countless people had walked here over decades, all recorded, all absorbed. My rational mind screamed that I was being manipulated, that the forest itself was testing me, observing my fear, calibrating its next move. I tried to document everything. Camera flashes illuminated the figure's pale face, the patterns in the dirt, the faint etchings in the bark. But each time I looked away, the forest changed. Trees repositioned, roots shifted, shadows realigned. Equipment malfunctioned in ways I've never seen. Batteries drained, footage corrupted, motion sensors triggered when nothing moved. It was as if the forest was aware of my devices, aware of me, and intentionally rewriting itself to remain inscrutable. I forced myself to circle the clearing, attempting to map the perimeter. The whispers escalated, repeating fragments of my own thoughts, feeding back to me. It wasn't a forest anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting not just my movements, but my fears, my hesitation, my growing awareness of what it could do. The figure moved closer each time I completed a loop, always just at the edge of light, never fully revealed. And then, suddenly, the clearing seemed to shrink, the edges compressing. I realized I was in the center of an invisible snare. I tried to leave. I thought I could retrace my steps, but the forest no longer resembled the trailhead I had entered from. Trees I'd passed before were now in impossible positions, blocking exits, bending in angles that should have been physically impossible. Every attempt to escape led me back to the central tree. The forest wasn't passive. It was actively containing me, studying my attempts, collecting data on my fear and endurance. Time became meaningless. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. The whispers continued, now interspersed with faint echoes of the missing hikers' voices, repeating phrases I recognized from the reports. "Do not stop. Keep walking. You belong." I felt an urge to follow the grooves in the dirt around the tree, to complete the pattern, to participate in the ritual. My body resisted, but my mind was drawn, compelled, aware of the ancient intelligence that watched from every branch, root, and shadow. Then, a sound unlike anything else, a low, resonant creaking that vibrated through the clearing. The figure stepped fully into view. Not walking, not running, gliding. Its face was a perfect imitation of the missing hiker, but hollow, and when it spoke, it didn't use words from its mouth. The voices came from everywhere at once, from the leaves, the roots, the air. They whispered, commanded, and warned simultaneously. Walk, observe, be absorbed, or remain. I knew in that instant the forest's patience had limits. It could wait, it could record, it could manipulate, but it also tested. It wanted me to make a choice, participate in its pattern, or resist and risk becoming lost forever. A part of the record in a way my physical body would never understand. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed to run, but every sense screamed that running alone wouldn't save me. The forest had already begun embedding me into its logic, into its memory. I swallowed my fear, steadied my breath, and whispered aloud, "I'm watching. I see you." The figure paused, tilting its head. The trees shifted subtly, the roots retracted slightly, and the clearing felt marginally larger. The forest was testing me still, but acknowledging that I had recognized it, observed it, understood that this was not a normal place. That awareness, however, was only the beginning. I knew I had to keep moving, keep documenting, keep thinking, or risk being added to the record myself. I took a cautious step forward, and the forest reacted, bending the shadows and adjusting the light. The concentric footprints seemed to ripple beneath my feet. As if aware of my presence, every heartbeat was amplified, every whisper synchronized. I realized then that I was no longer simply walking through a forest. I was inside a living memory, a library of human movement and thought, and every second counted. I ran. I don't know for how long, seconds, minutes, maybe hours, but every step I took, the forest seemed to rearrange itself. Roots that hadn't been there before twisted into my path. Branches reached down, scratching my arms and face as though testing my resolve. Leaves brushed across me, and faint whispers followed, repeating my name, urging me to stop, to join the pattern. I stumbled, almost collapsing, but forced myself forward. I couldn't pause, couldn't hesitate. The forest was patient, but only for so long. The clearing I had memorized earlier, the one with the ancient tree at the center, appeared behind me in glimpses through the fog, almost like it was tracking me. Shadows moved unnaturally along the edges, figures emerging just at the edge of vision, human-shaped, pale, observing. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to make my stomach churn, my blood run cold. I realized the missing hikers weren't gone. They were integrated into the forest's consciousness, echoes of those who had failed to resist. Eventually, the trail opened enough for me to see the faint outline of the ranger station. Ellis was there, waiting, calm, unblinking. He didn't question me, didn't speak of what I'd seen. He only said quietly, "They let you go. This time." His words carried weight I didn't understand at first, but now I do. The forest had tested me, recognized that I had seen, observed, and acknowledged it, but had not fully succumbed. I collapsed on the dirt, gasping, arms scratched and bleeding from branches, clothes torn. My camera and sensors had partially survived, but much of the footage was corrupted or lost entirely. GPS data showed nothing. The clearing didn't appear on any map. Ellis finally handed me a bottle of water and just nodded toward the trees. "It watches. Always. You just saw it." Weeks later, reports came in from hikers who had entered the same forest. Paths would change behind them, even in areas they had memorized. Shadows stretched and shifted unnaturally, and those who paused too long, who hesitated even for a second, spoke of whispers calling their names, voices of people they knew, people who had disappeared. Some vanished entirely, leaving only their echoes behind in the forest's living memory. Even now, I feel the forest. When I close my eyes, I can still see that clearing, that massive blackened tree, the concentric circles of footprints pressed deep into the soil. I can hear the faint whispers of those who came before, layering over one another. My own name is sometimes spoken back to me, soft and omnipresent, and I know, deep down, that one day I will return, or it will come for me. This forest doesn't hunt in the traditional sense. It doesn't need to. It records, it observes, it absorbs, and anyone who notices, who sees it for what it truly is, becomes part of the story it's collecting. If you were standing there, in the clearing, would you walk along the circle of footprints? Would you stop? Or would you try to fight the pull, knowing that hesitation could make you part of the record forever? Because some places, some forests, watch back, and they remember,